Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back to Nick 101, Pets 101 technically. And yeah, this is going to be a slightly different type of episode. So typically what I do in my videos is I um, talk about pets that I know about just so that you have a little bit of knowledge before you go ahead and bring one into your home. This is going to be something slightly different, which I'm going to make sure that you know the differences. I'm going to call these deep dives. Kind of thought that it would be a good way to put it, especially because my first topic is going to be ducks. So deep dive, little pun there. But this is just going to be slightly different, where this is going to be one where, hey, there's an animal out there that I realize I didn't know as much about as I thought, and it'd be kind of fun to learn a little bit more and kind of pass on to you what I've found out. And so in this case, it's ducks. So the reason why this video came to be is I live in the Northeast, and now the ducks are starting to come back into the ponds and stuff. So I was out on the porch, watching a couple of ducks fly in and do their thing on the water. And I realized how little I actually know about them. I know that they fly south for the winter, but where did they actually go in the south? I know that they eat bread and that it's not healthy for them, but what do they actually eat when we're not feeding them unhealthy bread? I know that they can fly in formation. They have that very signature flying V, which was obviously done in the Mighty Ducks. I'm showing my age, but the Mighty Ducks movies, and I think it's adorable that their ducklings walk behind them single file. But other than that, I realized I don't know a whole heck of a lot about them. So I figured I would find out a little bit more and pass the knowledge on to you. And so here we go. So, first of all, starting off with the name Duck, it very much is not a coincidence that when somebody yells "Duck" and you're supposed to, squat down, is the same as their name, and that's because of when they feed. So, and again, I'm going to talk about the most common of ducks because not every duck is going to be the exact same, but the most common ones they do that upend butt thing when they're feeding, so they don't fully submerge. They just put their upper portion down in the water and their bottom butt looks up, and so from the way that they feed, that's actually where their name came from, is duck, because I guess it came from a similar word, meaning just that, like to duck down. So I thought that was kind of interesting that, sometimes there's coincidences when it comes to words where it's like, well, why does that look and sound and, read and read and read and read, all that stuff. It's like, yeah, either there's just only so many words that you can say, that you can make with those, 26 that we use letters. And oh, in this case, it actually is, from that. Similarly, the phrase like a sitting duck, well, that comes from when they're hunting them. Obviously, shooting one in the air is, requires quite a bit of skill. But, once they're on the either ground or in the water, usually lured by decoys, then they're a sitting duck. It's a lot harder for them to move fast or take off right away. So that's the easier way to kill a duck for dinner. And so sitting duck is also where that phrase comes from. So I thought that was kind of neat. That was one of the first things that I found out when I did my deep dive. But yeah, so one thing that I found out was that swans and geese are actually included in the duck family, which is interesting because I thought they would be completely separate, species, but they're technically combined in the waterfowl family. So I thought that was neat. But yeah, so let's get into what they actually eat because I had no idea. So I was just like, well, so do they eat plants? Do they eat fish? I mean, like, what are they going for when they do that butt in the air thing? And I was kind of right. It's actually a combination of a lot of stuff. So they do eat, grasses and some like water reeds and stuff. They do actually catch the occasional little fish and everything. But ultimately they eat pretty much you name it. They can eat insects, insect larvae, worms, small mollusks, small amphibians, like think like for instance like an axolotl would be one, but normally those aren't in the same location. So they didn't usually have those predators. That's why the axolotl has so little defenses. If you see my axolotl video, you'll know why I'm talking about that. But But yeah, basically they'll eat pretty much. They're definitely omnivores. So they'll eat pretty much anything they can get to, and when they're doing that upend behavior, quite often they're actually getting into what's in the mud, and that's why they usually like to be in the shallower ends. Um, so there you go. I had no idea, and also with their beak, not many people have seen a duck up close, but their beak actually does have what looks like teeth. They say it's more like a comb-like thing. Um, that's called pectin, and so I guess it's similar to the baleen of a whale, where what they'll do is they'll get a mouthful of water, they'll strain the water out through the comb, and then keep trapped whatever their food might be, whether it be the small fish. And what's interesting is that those serve a double duty, where they that's actually what they use when they're preening as well, to help get into the feathers. And I guess it also, helps act as a tooth in order to, hold on to slippery foods when they're eating. But yeah, if you ever wondered what they're, upending themselves about, it could be any number of those things, so they can actually eat on the land, they can eat in the water, and, you know, bread is not their main staple of food, and it's actually one of the lesser healthy things that we could actually feed them. So, not entirely sure why it is that we throw them bread instead of, possibly something else that they would prefer and that would be healthier for them. But maybe that's just the easiest access, and the occasional bread isn't necessarily going to hurt them. I'm not 100% sure, but I just thought that that was pretty interesting, especially the fact that, we're just talking about the main, staples of ducks. There's actually some that are heavy enough that they can actually submerge in fish, much like a loon. Loons are cool. They actually like get down in the water. They actually, swim around and actually catch the fish. And there's some bigger ducks that do that. Now the trade-off though is because they're heavier and they can submerge. That also means they're not as fast to get out of the water and into the air. And in the air is when they're at their safest. So in the air, a duck literally only has two predators. They have us, and they have maybe predatory birds like the peregrine falcon, which, by the way, is a sick bird. And I might actually do a deep dive on peregrine falcons because those guys are nuts. They're the ones that just can just fold in their wings and just shoo like just oh my god, like a crazy dive bombing, sick accuracy, amazing eyesight. Those guys are nuts, but those guys can actually pluck a duck out of the air. And so it's just nuts of a lifestyle to live when you think about it. It's like, oh, okay, so why they spend so much time in the water? Well, it's like, well, that's where they have to clean themselves and eat and everything. But ideally, if they could just spend their entire life in their air, that would be at their safest. So you'd think that like flying around would be exhausting, and that oh, I can find a nice pond and I can relax. Well, it's the opposite. That's actually when they're at their most vulnerable to predators. So it just kind of stinks because it makes you realize it's like, wow, what if like I lived in a nice safe cabin that I had no natural predators, but the only way that I could eat was to go down to an alligator infested waters and fish. So like literally the only time that I would be able to get any sustenance is when I was potentially making myself sustenance at the same time. And I guess that's true of most any animal. I mean, like giraffes could kick the head off a lion, but when it comes time to go drink some water, I mean they're at their absolute most awkward. They have to spread their legs way out, and so it just made me realize that that's how a lot of animals end up having to live, where it's just like, okay, the places that you need to be in order to maintain the species. So, for instance, um, nothing more vulnerable than when you're an egg. So there's predators always trying to get into the eggs. And then when they're ducklings, they're really screwed because they really can't do any flying. So they can get picked off by pretty much name it. I mean, like even a snapping turtle can bring them down. A owl, just you don't even hear the wings. That's something cool about owls too. I might even do one about owls. I mean, this is doing the deep dive is going to open up a whole list of possibilities because I, mostly only know about domesticated animals that are in a pet store, whereas the ones in the wild, and ducks can be domesticated, and we'll briefly touch upon that. But if you're here to find out how to take care of a duck, I mean, go, do some research other than this video. I'm just going to touch upon it because it'd feel weird doing one of these without talking about the habitat. But ultimately, that's not what the purpose of this video is for. It's just doing some neat little trivia on ducks, and I hope that you find it as interesting as I do. But since we are on the subject, I might as well get it out of the way. I do. Mm, all right, I'll talk about it briefly, but then I want to end on a funny story. So stick around till the end because you're gonna like it. Trust me. It's one of the other reasons. So one reason why I want to do ducks is because I just happened to see him and be like, oh, I guess I don't know as much about him as I thought I did. And then the other is because there's a very domestic story that is pretty hilarious that I think you'll appreciate. But I guess it's relatively easy to keep them. Um, you really just kind of need enough space for them to dabble and preen. Ideally a pond, because you can keep ducks without a pond, but if you usually have to find just the right species, and even then they might just decide to fly the coop, I guess as it were, to find a pond. So you ideally want to have a pond. And then, of course, a duck house and a run to protect them from predators. Predators is going to be a big one. You basically, uh, if you think about it, like when you keep domesticated, like chickens and ducks and stuff, it's like any predator that's out there, it's just like, wait, 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 wait. You take my favorite food and you put them into a tight space that all I have to do is figure out how to break into that tight space, and now I have a buffet for myself. So, that's where it, comes to like, either doing a really good build or yeah, even having another animal that would make a good, protector of them, like a duck, sorry, a dog or whatever. But from listening to Joe Rogan, apparently he had an issue where he did have a dog, and when he had chickens, and unfortunately, the dog made friends with the coyote, and the coyote convinced the dog to help him break in. And then once the dog realized, oh, the coyote, my buddy, enjoys the chickens, well, maybe they're cool, and so the dog broke in. It was a whole mess, and it sucks, and it is what it is, but something to consider if you are going to try and use an animal for protection. But apparently they do breed a large number of eggs. Now I had one. I have had a coworker that kept ducks, and I'm on the elimination diet, so I always keep track of if I have a new food item to see if I went up the next day. And unfortunately, duck eggs, I can do chicken eggs, on a pretty regular basis and not have any issues. But apparently, duck eggs, my body doesn't enjoy. I definitely had a reaction to them. I was up the next day. I definitely felt a little, rumbly and stuff. So I guess duck eggs aren't for me, but for others, maybe that's going to be a great, deal because they apparently do lay quite a large number. Something else that's cool is that I know that when you have a lot of most omnivorous pets, like for instance with dogs, their poo is not going to be great for the grass, as many dog owners know. Their pee and poo, often will destroy grass, but in this case, it's actually top grade fertilizer. I don't know how they can take, the fish and mollusks and somehow make that, healthy for the grass, but they managed to do it. So it's actually good to have them around instead of, I don't know, I may be telling tales out of school, but I think Canadian geese, it's like their poo isn't good for anything. um, and yeah, if you have a lot of slugs in your area, never have to worry about that again if you have ducks. Pardon my burps. Acid reflux. I don't wish it on anybody, but thanks for suffering through. I know that happens quite often in my podcasts, so thanks for bearing with me. Um, but yeah, so you can definitely keep ducks just like you can keep chickens. And what's interesting is that something that I found out, not even in my research, but something that I already knew, is that if it gets pretty cold where you live, you still don't have to really worry about keeping ducks because they actually do really well in the cold. The main reason why they do the migration is because of their food. All of those worms and mollusks and plant life is not going to be sticking around when there's snow on the ground and ice on the lake. So they have to move because they still need to eat. It isn't necessarily that they are like, I can't stand this. My feathers don't keep any of the cold out. They actually are pretty well insulated. So you usually can do a pretty good job of being able to keep them year round, even if you live in a relatively cold climate when it comes to the wintertime. So when it comes to breeding, they're monogamous, but only usually for a year. Most species. So they usually will stick with the same one while they're raising the ducklings, and then the next year they'll branch out to somebody else, which isn't necessarily bad for the gene pool. It is interesting. None of my research actually mentioned if they tend to ever go back to the an original mate. Like what if they were just like, oh man, you know that mate from a couple years ago was a nightmare. Let's go back to that one from the year before because they were pretty cool. Doesn't really mention that, and so it is really sweet about the fact that the ducklings usually keep up behind them and they do the whole single file thing, which I think is great. Some of the other bird species that do that I've noticed when I was in Tucson is the quail. Quail babies also, do the single file line behind them. So I guess it is maybe a bit of a bird thing. I don't notice many others that typically do that. Um, Moms are usually very caring and protective, but honestly, like, if the duckling is just SOL, they're at a place that they can't get to. They're just usually like, all right, well, bye, so, they're caring up to a point, especially like, I think it was a goose that when I was very very young, I didn't realize, but I had accidentally stumbled upon the nest. I didn't step on the nest, but I stumbled upon it. I got close enough to it, and that thing went after me. Like, I mean, even as a kid, I mean, I was still like, at least 10 of that swan. At least in weight and height alone. I was like 10 of that swan, and that's or goose rather. And so that thing did not care. It still managed to bite right onto my thigh, and thankfully all it got was a mouthful of jeans. Otherwise, that would have really hurt. But they are very protective up to a point, apparently. Um, oh, and something else that was interesting is, so they do a lot of digging in the mud and stuff, for their food. So one thing I never noticed, looking at 100 pictures of ducks, versus other birds, so their nostrils are actually, because of that, part of the beak. So because digging through like a lot of dirt and stuff, can obviously like tear up your skin if you had skin. So for instance, if you have a parakeet, which I've talked about in other videos, but parakeets, if you look at their beak, there's beak, and then there's the nostrils, and it's a separate part. It's the nares technically, but it's actually like this little, this little part, and then there's the feathers. So it's like feathers, that part of the nose, and then the beak. Ducks actually have their nostrils right on the beak because they need that hard, you know, beak to, when they're going through there. Otherwise, they'd just be tearing up their nostrils like crazy. Probably get infected, and then they can't breathe through their nose, and that's obviously going to be debilitating for them. So that was one thing. That was just a teeny little detail. That's why I love going into these deep dives. It was a teeny little detail that I never would have noticed unless somebody put it on paper, and then been like, "Oh yeah, they don't have those separate nares like a lot of other animals do." And if I had noticed, then I still would have known why. And it's because they're digging through some grainy stuff. Wouldn't necessarily be great. Now this one was fascinating. So quacking. Um, if you think duck, you think quack. And apparently, that is not as common as you would normally think. Mostly, it's female mallard ducks that actually make a quacking noise. Even the male mallard ducks don't make as much of a quack; they more make of a kind of a wheezy noise. So the whole whack whack whack. If you hear that, you can be pretty safe to say that that's a female mallard duck. That's not necessarily going to be one of the many subspecies of ducks that there are. I always thought that was just hand in hand. I thought ducks and quacks were just um, universally combined. And apparently, that's just like one of those old wives' tales, common misconceptions, which I was just like, what? My whole world's turned upside down. Not really. Who cares? But at the same time, it's just like, are you kidding me? No, 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 no. Ducks quack, and that's that. And if you want to fight me on it, meet me outside. But no, it's actually mostly just the females and the mallards mainly. And I just thought that was fascinating. Now, what's the most interesting thing, and probably the least interesting to you, because if you're here for info, I got nothing for you. I was thinking that I would find out pretty specifically where it is that those ducks in my pond go, every winter. I knew south. South is such a broad term, though. I mean, like, technically anything that, on a compass that's below me is south. So, I mean, like, that could be, the next town down for all I knew. So, I was hoping to really get, like, a good, like, okay, well, if you live in, like, say, this area, of, the U.S., then it's just like they go to this area of the U.S. and, apply that general term to wherever you happen to live. But not really. I mean, there's actual entire sites, dedicated to like trying to keep track of like, okay, this duck group went where and this duck group went here. So when they fly south in the V formation, which by the way I found out is there is actually a reason for them doing that. So the wing. So kind of like if you're a bicyclist and you're behind another bicyclist, or even cars and racing and stuff. If there's one breaking the wind, not farting, but breaking the wind for you, it's easier for you to bike or drive or fly behind one. And so, um, if if you're flying in front and you have two ducks behind you and slightly off to the side, they're both kind of taking advantage of that slipstream that you're creating. So you're working the hardest, but you're making it easier for every duck behind you, and then you take turns. And it's also a great way to keep track of everybody, make sure that everybody's all together and that they're not losing sight of the rest of the flock. It isn't always clear skies when you're flying. So yeah, there is a very scientific reason for the flying V formation, and it's mostly for um, you know making it easier for the others in the trail. And I thought that that was pretty cool. Um, as far as the walking single file, I mean that I haven't really been able to find out much about. It just seems to make sense, where it's like as long as we're not like going all over the place like a cat underneath your legs, then it's easier to keep track of mom, because all I have to do is follow a head, and then the big butt in front of me. So um but yeah, so when they talk to each other, it's not often in the a quack. And then when they do migrate, it's mostly coastal, in the south. And that's about as specific as it got for me. Is they're mostly in the coast, and they mostly are hanging out there. And when I was really young, it didn't occur to me, like I was just like, well, I mean, shoot, if they like the south so much during the wintertime, then why don't they just stay there during the summertime? Like it isn't and then it just made me realize as I got older, where I have a lot of people that I know that can afford it, that will go north during the this summertime, and south during the wintertime. It's basically like living in California. You're basically keeping it 72 degrees the whole time. And hey, maybe they even enjoy a change of scenery, like we might. You don't know what's going on in a duck's head, but that was something that occurred to me when I was a kid, but I never really looked into it. I was just like, why don't you just stay in the south then? I mean, why doing all that back and forth? For salmon, it doesn't. I think it makes even less sense. That the whole salmon thing is kind of nuts, but with ducks, it actually now it makes a lot more sense to me in my head, where it's just like, well, yeah, hey, if I could ever afford it, I'd be a snowbird too. And the locals might poo on me, where it's just like, you make traffic worse during this time of the year. And it's just like, well, I get the appeal, though. I don't know if I'll ever become one, but I mean, I totally see where they're coming from. So yeah, it's a little too hot in the south in the summer, and it's a little too cold in the north in the winter. Just always go to where the good weather is and where the good feeding is, and you're always going to have plenty to eat on. And I don't know, it is interesting to me, though, that they choose to breed when they're in the north, because I know that we get the ducklings in the south. That's just their vacation home. So technically they're northerners, if you want to mince hairs, or whatever the expression is. Mince hairs? I don't think that's even close, but you get it. Um, so what's hilarious is that you probably already outed me, but I am definitely like um, not noting Wikipedia at the time as I'm reading, just in case there's something that I haven't covered. And what's funny is that one of the parts in Wikipedia is cultural references, and they do mention the Mighty Ducks in Emilio Estevez. It's like, if it's a Wikipedia page about ducks, I was not expecting a childhood movie to show up in the trivia, where it's like, is that really relevant to the animal that we're talking about right now? Like, are you seriously talking about the Mighty Ducks, on the Wikipedia page? But hey, I mean, there's no such thing as too much knowledge. Might as well throw that in there too. But I just think whoever took the time to mention Mighty Ducks on the duck page, I mean, I tip of the hat to you. That just made me giggle, and more power to you. Um, but yeah, so I mean, ducks apparently have been used for pretty much everything. Like, yes, we've eaten their meat, we've eaten their eggs. Um, you know, I completely forgot that we use the feathers for down. I mean, and way back in the day too. I'm not sure which quills they used for writing, but if you all remember, they used to back in the day when they wrote, they would actually, have a thing of ink, and they would, the feathers actually have like hollowness where it goes to connect to the skin, and so you can actually get them to withhold a little bit of ink, and then as you write, the ink would trace along the paper, and wholly inefficient. And what's interesting is that where the ballpoint pen came from. I know I'm completely going off on the rails, but then again, so did the guy that talked about Mighty Ducks. So I think I'm in the right here. But where the ballpoint pen came from is so a guy that was using the quill and probably thinking, Jesus, this is one of the most inefficient ways of writing ever. But then his inkwell spelled, and he had a dog, and the dog had a ball. Actually, I think that's how it spelled. Is that the dog was playing with its ball. The ball knocked over the ink. Ink got on the ball, and then when the ball rolled, it left a line of ink. And the guy was just like, "Oh my god! If I could get that instead of a quill feather, if I could figure out a way to get a small ball." That just had ink that it would do that. That would make it so much easier, and somehow that's how the ballpoint pen came to be. Now, if you think about it, the finite, like I've dealt with machining in the past, and so like the variance that you can have for a piece to still fit with another piece is very, very finite. And so like with a ballpoint pen, it's amazing that someone could get such a spherical thing trapped in such a small little spot to have just that much ink, work. Um, but I love that almost every important invention, came from an accident, and so that was definitely one that it was completely accidental that ink got on the ball. He saw that it made a line, and he was just like, well, how can I get a line that way where I don't have to keep dipping, 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 getting ink all over myself? I mean, I thought that was absolutely cool. But, all right, so let me just make sure that I have covered most of the bases. Again, I don't know if this is interesting to anybody else, but I mean, this is some stuff that I just found absolutely fascinating. And, it makes a lot more sense why, you would spend all that time to make a decoy duck and, invent a new type of duck call and then get called out for being a racist, all just so that you can get the ducks to land. And it's so much easier. I mean, I've been clay pigeon shooting, and, I wasn't too bad at it, but I can definitely see the appeal of like, hey, how about we don't just try and, have a split second, to try and bring them down, and then try and find them is even more fun. But yeah, so stuff like that is just pretty cool. And the ducks have learned a lot more, and I definitely had no idea that they were so diverse in their diet. I mean, I just knew all I knew was bread. So anyway, so the cool story is that um, where I live, it's one of those places that you pay a dues, and there's certain rules, to how you live. So, for instance, my buddy up the street, they get harassed because they have a kid, and so there was a lot of kid toys and playground, and equipment and stuff, like outside on the lawn. And I guess they thought that that made it look a little trashy, so they said, "Hey, you got to clean up the yard, otherwise you get a fine." And I think that any HOAs, homeowners associations, um, you start from a good place. So one of my oh my god, so you start from a good place, just like, hey, I live in a nice place, and I would like people to move in that also have similarly minded views of keeping it a nice place. And then what ends up happening is that you get the person appointed to it that just has a power trip, and they just start getting really arbitrary with their demands, and it ends up becoming more of a hassle than it does a good thing. And I mean, I'm sorry, this is an adult podcast, so I'm just going to reference one of my favorite things from Bo Burnham. Bo Burnham, is an artist that has some silly songs, and so one of the songs talks about how like the person that started the company that makes rape whistles, where when you started out, you had the best of intentions that you wanted to reduce the rate of rape, but after a while you realize you don't want to reduce the rate at all, because if the rate declines, you see an equal decline in whistle sales. I thought that was such an interesting concept, where it's just like, yeah, a lot of stuff that comes from, a good place ends up becoming horrific. And I think homeowners associations, the people that are just like, your freaking mailbox is 3 inches too tall, like, who cares if if the postal service had a problem with it, they leave me a note, but you shouldn't have to be able to decide that. I think it's I mean, horrific's the wrong word, but I keep going back to that I mean, the American dream is that you you scrape and you save and you suffer and you eat ramen and you manage to get enough to be able to have your own piece of land that you can call your own. And now that it's your own land, you should be able to do whatever you want with it. If you want to build a huge giant statue of you know, your favorite, animal that passed away. I mean, like, yeah, it's garish and it's unsightly, but that is you and you alone. That is up to you. That is how you choose to use your land. And the fact that there's somebody that, has a say in that is just annoying. So I love this man for sticking it to the sticking it to the man, I guess you could say. Like, he bucked the system, he fought the law, and he won. And so where we live, we're not allowed to have ducks. And right down the street, there's a guy that has ducks. And I had to find out, how in the heck is he allowed to have ducks when nobody else around is allowed to keep chickens or any domesticated, thing like that? And you're going to love this. So, what he ended up doing was, I guess he had like a lawyer friend. This is all hearsay. I don't know if this is true, but I'm never going to research further into it because I want it to be true. He has a lawyer friend that wrote up something saying that those ducks are his emotional support ducks. And so he has every legal right to keep them because they are emotionally support ducks. And now he has ducks, and honestly, I mean, he treats them great. I mean, like, they have, like this, nice house, swimming pool, not swimming pool, but you know what I mean, like, the kiddie pool. And I believe the fence is actually, electric to keep out, any would-be predators. I think that I see a little light on, and I think that that's not for heater. I think it's for actually the fence. So those guys are good. They're living their best life. That is a life that is completely free of stress, free of worries of where the next food source is coming, where the next predator is going to get him. The ducks, then provide him with, like, eggs and then eventually meat. I think it is a great, thing that they have going on, and the way that he got around it to me is just chef's kiss. And so I just wanted to end with that because I thought that you might get a kick out of it like I would. That he bucked the system in the most glorious way. Nobody's hurt. You know what I mean? Like, this is a victimless crime. And it isn't even a crime. It was just like a way of getting around what is already a silly system. It's his emotional support ducks. Honestly, if you're in a similar situation, look into it. I think that that is a great workaround. And now he has, eggs to eat, ducks for a pet, and and like I said, like, from what I've seen walking past the house, I mean, they're living life, man. So I think that's a good note to end on. And I don't know, maybe you learned a couple of things about ducks that you hadn't known before, and you're just like, huh, that was interesting and slightly entertaining. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.